So I'm here with Cecilia Demille Presley, and Cecilia called me a few years ago, out of the blue actually, after I had written this book about the prophetic imagery of Anthony Quinn. And she immediately recognized some of the things that we talked about in the book and called me up and said, "You don't know half the story." So I'm here today with Cecilia. She also wrote a book about Cecil B. DeMille, her grandfather. So we're going to hear some very interesting things about that and the relationship between her and Anthony Quinn. So I think it's a fascinating story. The history is important. It relates back to things that I've written about in the book and her personal knowledge of these things with Anthony Quinn. So Cecilia Demille Presley. So when you called me, I guess I was looking up the emails, it was about 2017, and you actually sent me a quick email or had one of your secretaries call. And when we spoke on the phone, the first thing I said to you, it's fascinating that he painted these paintings that had a prophetic side to them. They were telling stories that hadn't happened yet. They were telling stories in imagery that were yet to happen. And you said you don't know the half of the story. Do you remember what motivated you on that at all?
Sure. I should really start with our relationship.
Please do.
Tony was my uncle. His first wife was Catherine DeMille. And he was my favorite uncle, one of the earliest relatives I remember. And later in life, he was divorcing, and I was too, and we didn't want a relationship, and we had a wonderful uncle-niece relationship and became great friends. And I was raised by my grandfather, Cecil B. DeMille, who had a like mind with Tony, always on the move in art and movies and stories and acting, and so it was
a natural relationship.
It was a natural. We had lots of friends in the motion picture business that we both knew, and we just had a lot of fun. It was a relationship of intellectualism, because Tony was an artist, and I appreciated that. He was a reader of books and history, and it was a life I loved.
So you mentioned events like being with Frank Sinatra, being with others.
Well, one of our fun things to do was when the Rat Pack was playing Las Vegas. Tony wasn't part of that scene, but he loved the people and loved them on stage. So we would take friends like Brad Dexter, the actor, and he was going with China George Brent's sister, beautiful girl, and go to Las Vegas. And Sammy Davis was one of his best friends and mine too. And Sinatra was so much fun. And all of them were just very nice people who had a lot of fun. And we did too, and they'd go to parties afterward, and I called everybody Mr. Sinatra because that's what I was taught to do.
You were probably 20 or 22 years old, right?
Exactly. I think I was 21. And so after I'd just have maybe a glass of wine and then leave, because that wasn't mine. Tony would say good night.
That was a hint to go.
That was a hint to go. And that was the relationship we had.
So he was freshly divorced from Catherine, or separated from Catherine, who was your aunt?
They were going through the divorce.
Okay, and that it was very cool that you would hang out with them, that you were...
Oh, the family's fine with it. They knew that it was probably good for both of us.
Uh-huh.
We had nothing but an intellectual relationship, and that kept us both out of trouble. People who are, I call them seers, S-E-E-R, who see the future. And people who are, they don't talk about it. Tony was one, and my father was one. And Tony would walk in, because we were staying at the Sands Hotel, which was the big hotel, and the first time he said, give me $1, give me $1, and I gave him one of those silver dollars. He put it on 12, I think it was, and 12 came right up. And he started to walk away. He said, no, 15. He put it on 15, and the other people all covered the bed. And he said, no, and he was angry. You ruined it, he said, and walked out. He did that all the time. And I asked him, why don't you put more money on it? And he said, no, it's not something you make money with. I never keep the dollar or the money. I give it to the boys.
Huh.
And but he did do that, and I would. Sometimes I knew he saw numbers, but he didn't act on it. And sometimes he would think of something and say, I think that this will happen, and it always did. It was astounding. It was astounding.
You mentioned one time about a car accident or something that a car accident happened and he said, "Oh my God, thank God it's over."
Yeah.
And do you remember that story
Yes.
at all?
He didn't. He told me that when he had a premonition that it would start very slowly, and he wouldn't know what it meant. I mean, a car was in bad, and he didn't know if he knew anybody in it or why it was coming. And then it got clearer and clearer. And this one, and he said, you can't make it come and you can't make it go. When the incident happens, it's gone out of your brain, and you don't have to think about it anymore. And I guess this car accident happened, and we knew about it. Somebody coming home from Las Vegas or something had a car crash. It was not, his friend had died in the car, and another boy was driving it back, and that's what he saw.
What happened with me, and I'd love you to just jump in and comment about this, was that when I first became involved with his art, I was in a warehouse alone, and I felt his presence everywhere. It had only been months since he had passed, but there was a big painting called Triumph up on the wall of him looking down at me, and his pens were right there, his glasses were right there, his paintbrushes sometimes were there. There was this overwhelming presence of him. And as I was going through the art, there was this one painting. Now, this was only a year after 9/11, and even at the time, CNN and the other news agencies had these images, the same images, over and over and over again, and they were frequently the second plane crashing into the towers. They were Osama bin Laden's face. They were the hijackers' faces. They were the firemen standing in front of the destroyed structures. They were all these very familiar images. And I looked and I saw this painting, and those images jumped out at me immediately. Partly because of the influence of seeing it on television all the time, partly because it was such a dramatic event in history, and we were aware of it. And there was this painting on the floor that had, at that time I saw 3, 4, 5 images right away. I thought it was very strange. I pulled it out, and it had Anthony Quinn's signature on it. And I said, this is impossible. And I kept looking at it, going, that is definitely the Twin Towers. That's definitely a plane crashing into them. That's definitely this, that, or the other thing. And I called Catherine up and said, my God, have you seen this painting of the 9/11 by Tony? And she said, oh my God, that's not that. He painted that in 1985. That's not this, that's not that. And I went, no, it is that. Look at it again. And she was not open to discussing it. Does that surprise you that there was something like that?
No, not at all. It doesn't surprise me, because I saw so much of it with him. Whether you believe that or not, when you see something happen like that, then you go, whoa, what is this that this person has? And I know people are like that. They don't talk about it because people think you're nuts. But it happens to a lot of people. It's when you know somebody's going to call, the telephone rings. That seems to be a part of it. But when you see it happen, like I saw it happen with Tony so many times,
yeah.
I mean, how many people can randomly call out a number while a roulette wheel is going around and know where it's going to land? He did that so many times, I can't tell you.
I find that when I was studying about him, reading his books, reading his biographies, and then watching as many interviews as I could, speaking with Catherine, of course, and other people who knew him, but that his curiosity was tremendous,
yeah.
and he had an urge to understand things more deeply. And in his books, in his writings, there's an array of events in his life that he described in a tone where he did not understand how they happened. He didn't understand, for example, the fact that he remembered. He was absolutely positive that he remembered being 1.5 years old or 2 years old and coming across the border in Texas from Mexico.
Well, you know, things that are traumatic. A lot of kids remember very young things that were traumatic and can't quite place them in, but they remember the scene, even see themselves in that scene. That's not.
Yeah, that's true. He speaks about a little boy, this little boy that haunted him, that followed him. But if you read Tony's books, where he speaks about them, he specifically indicates that it's not Christopher, but that it was some similarity to there. It was like he was perplexed about it. It was always there. The little boy was always present. He was seeing a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said to him, "Did you see the boy today?" And he said, "I did see the boy." And he said, "Well, let's tell me about him." So he said, "Well, he's about 11 and a half years old." What a strange age to pick, 11 and a half. He's got a crooked smile, tousled hair. He has a certain look to him, and high cheekbones, he describes him. And so the doctor says, "Well, why don't you paint a painting of him? This will help you." And Tony loved that idea, so he eventually did a painting of him. But in the book, he continues to talk about this little boy showing up on the lawn. He showed up in the cafeteria at the studios. He would walk alongside the car when he was driving, and he was just bothered by this boy that kept appearing. So I walked in Catherine's house probably 10 or 12 years ago, and there was a painting on the floor of a little boy. And I said, she was redecorating the house at the time. And Catherine is brilliant at that, by the way. She does an amazing job with putting Tony's paintings up and putting other art up. She was working on that, and there was this little painting. There was a little painting on the ground, and I said, "My God, who painted the painting of Ryan?" Now Ryan was Tony's 13th child, the little boy that he loved, I think, more than anything in the whole world. And he was 3.5 at the time, and when Tony died, I should say. And it was an identical painting of Ryan. And I said, "Who painted the painting of Ryan?" She said, "Oh my God, that's not Ryan. Tony painted that in 1940 or something." And I said, "That's Ryan." She said, "No, it's not." I said, "Go get Ryan." So anyway, this is Ryan when Tony died. This is.
Yeah, that's when
Yeah, so
that's when
he
I
was
knew
about
Ryan.
3.5,
Yeah.
right there. Now, if you flip the page over, this is the painting with the 11-and-a-half-year-old Ryan.
I just got goosebumps
There
all over.
There you go.
Oh, God.
See?
Yeah, well,
And that's how I was impacted.
Well-
I was, and we brought, Ryan comes out, and we take the picture, and it's identical.
it's identical. It is identical.
In fact, so then the thing was, well, that could have been Christopher, but Christopher died when he was 2.
I knew Christopher.
Yeah.
He looked nothing like that.
There you go.
No, I played with Christopher every day. Christopher was a year younger than me.
Right. And then they said, well, it could have been Tony when he was 11 or something, but
no.
Tony would have nothing to reach for to grab that. This was something else was occurring here.
Well,
It's so dynamic. It's so identical, and it's actually one of the best paintings I've ever seen of him. I mean, he's done some brilliant things, but there's something really special about this piece. There are other things.
Well,
Isn't that amazing?
there are stranger things in life than we can imagine.
Yeah.
You can't define it. It's not scientific. It's not anything. It's just there.
Yeah. During Lust for Life with Kirk Douglas, Tony tells the story that he walked in to the room when Kirk Douglas was being made up as Van Gogh, and that he looked so much like Van Gogh, Tony became panicked. How am I possibly going to act across from Van Gogh, actually Van Gogh? How am I going to be Gauguin with actually Van Gogh?
That would
It
be
terrified
my
him.
response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he went off in a state of panic, and he heard a voice, and the voice says to him, "Don't worry about it. You're going to be fine." And he goes, "Who is this?" And he said, "It's Gauguin." And he said, "Just do this, just do that. You'll be fine. You're going to be great." And so he communicated with Gauguin, and then he was in a scene, and the voice told him, "Don't hold the brush like that." He was painting. "Don't hold the brush like that. Hold the brush like this." And he stopped the scene. He said, "Gauguin's talking to me right now." So the whole set was there. The set was there. The director was there. And they said, "Tony, what are you doing?" He said, "Gauguin's talking to me. He's been talking to me for 2 days." And they said, "Okay, well, is he done talking to you now? Can you go back to the scene?" So he tells this story.
For instance, when I was playing Gauguin, sitting in the same spot where he had painted, and I had the painting in front of me, and there I was, made up as Gauguin, and I felt that there was something lacking. I couldn't really get up to the canvas. And I just merely holding a brush and dipping it into the paint, and I actually felt that I felt that Gauguin himself, who had been there many years before, actually came and sat beside me and helped me with the scene. I know that sounds rather strange, but I've had many experiences of this sort. And
Well, he was interviewed. There were several people that were interviewed about it. It was at least a couple of newspaper articles about how Tony Quinn claims he was speaking to the ghost of Gauguin during Lust for Life, and he never denied it. And then later, he actually answered the question by saying, "You know what? It's true, it happened, but I don't want to talk about it." So this is your book, and it's a brilliant, amazing story
Won
about
the National Book Award. It went back to the.
Well, I'm not surprised at all. It's a brilliant
history.
book. And one of the things that I really love in here was this beautiful picture of, I guess, you and your grandfather. And you can just see this loving man with his, what were you, 10 or 11 years old?
Yeah, about.
Yeah. And he's adoring you, and you two are looking at something, maybe a horse or something out the window.
Well, I don't know, there was a fountain out there that we loved, but grandfather never admonished me, no matter what I did. He would just tell me a story. And the story would be what he did.
He was a great
about what I did.
storyteller too, of course.
I asked him what he did when I was a kid. He said, "I tell stories." So when I was asked what your father did, because he raised me, I said, "He tells stories." So, or one time I asked him what he did. I listened to the Lux Radio Theater on Monday night, and I said he sells soap.
He must have told you that too one time or something.
No, I just heard.
Oh, you just put them together.
Because he would say Lux, on
yeah,
the radio.
that's terrific. Now, Cecil B. DeMille, the man, I get the impression that he loved children. You may have been his favorite, but it seems.
Well, I think he
adopted several children.
He did, and my mother was his only natural child, and then he adopted Catherine, Richard, and John. And grandmother really was responsible. She worked in an adoption agency early in, but he loved kids. And they had the run of the house, and we had every kind of animal you can imagine running all over. And it was just a happy family. You have such an understanding of Tony, and very few people do.
Well, he talks to me. I mean, he's my personal favorite artist.
See, you know about him.
Yeah, and he's my, I studied him so much, and I feel his presence a lot. His work really transcends his celebrity.
But has there ever been a showing of his artwork, like in?
Oh yeah. Well, there were many shows actually. When he was alive, there were many shows, and they were always very successful. He was one of the first living artists at the time to do $2 million in a day of his prints and things like that. It was no high end things. It was just such a dynamic interest in his work. There's always been that, and I've had a couple of shows, but there definitely is something happening now with young people recognizing his work again, because first of all, You can go in 1,000 art galleries today, and you won't find someone who does work in marble, who does work in granite or stone or Carrara, Italy marble. He did those things. He spent crazy money. He didn't care what it cost. I swear he was selling art for a price that was less than what it cost him to produce.
Money was not a part of Tony's, was not a focus in Tony's life. You had to make enough to eat and feed your family, but his art was everything.
Yeah, I sense that. His reproductions, his prints, he would do them in the very old school method of xerography, which was incredibly expensive. So if he wanted to do 400 prints of a certain piece, he would have to buy all 400 prints in advance. So he would spend $150,000, $200,000, $300,000 to make a set of prints. Nobody does that.
Well, and actors didn't get money like they get today.
No, that's right. He would finance it with an art gallery that was supporting his work and things like that. But it was an amazing undertaking, and they were very the art gallery who supported him were very stressed out about it, because the amount of money he would spend was bankrupting them. But it would come back. It would sell and it would come back. So they started to have more and more faith. But even today, the reproductions that I have available to me and that Catherine Quinn has are of the highest quality you could ever see.
But
That's him. That was him, right?
I never saw him ever spend money on himself. I mean, he'd go have dinner and that kind of, but never.
Yeah, he wasn't a fancy car guy or any of that stuff.
No, he wasn't a fancy car guy, and he wasn't a fancy clothes guy, and he wasn't.
I think he spent an awful lot of money on his artwork. And books. He loved
his
books. He
library.
couldn't stop. Yeah, and they're all historical and art related.
Well, and
they're not fluff. There's no fluff.
I guarantee you, he read them.
Yeah.
He would read so many books. You came in reading all the time. But in our home was just a giant library. It had thousands of books in it.
Yeah.
And grandfather and I both read all the time.
Yeah. So, I try to explain that to people today. It's so easy today to make a reproduction. They basically scan it, push a button, print it, you walk away with it.
Yeah.
It's that fast.
Yeah.
But it's not expensive. And the quality, while the imagery is perfect, it doesn't have that feeling of being artwork as his work does.
Well, look at the reproductions of the great artists like Doré.
Yeah.
And the real old.
Right.
They're just stunning.
Right. And even the turn of the 20th century, you had Picasso, Chagall, Moreau, and all of these guys experimenting with print work, and they were doing some magnificent things, but they were integrating their talent with reproduction. Tony, in the 80s, went back to that.
To them.
He went back to that. He insisted on going back to that.
It was his work. He didn't want to.
He was integrating that again. So for 40 years or so, artists got away from that because they didn't want to spend that kind of money. But he didn't care. He spent the money, and it's I know we're selling some of this stuff today for less than it probably cost him, but it's still magnificent. It's not like anything else. The man, really.
What's your favorite painting of his?
I love his self-portraits. There's one in particular. It's called Glance in the Mirror, and the story behind it is very fascinating. He came off of the stage, and he had this.
From Zorba?
Yeah, right. He came off the stage and he had this motivation to do a painting, and he did this quick painting. It took him 16 minutes, I think, is what the story is, to do this painting. And he had to get it on paper. He had to get it down. And when they asked him, it was a self-portrait of him, but the face is all kind of twisted and construed a little bit. But it's Tony. And they asked him, he called it Glance in the Mirror, and they said, what is that? He said, whenever I'm done with a play, and I come into my room and I look in the mirror, I see myself changing from the from the character back into the person. I'm changing from the character back into Tony Quinn.
I've seen him do it.
Okay. So he said that I just had to get that down on paper because it's
I
me
love
changing
that.
back.
Now, that's an interesting
Passionate story, right?
Because that comes from almost every great actor. They're inside that person's head.
Mm.
And to get out of it, it takes
some
some
energy.
It takes
Yeah.
some energy.
But he also did a series of pieces we call the romantic abstracts. They're abstract paintings, but they have this loving, sweet side to them. They're primarily women or women's images, mothers, kind of elegant imagery, and they're just a gentle, sweet touch to it. It's something special about them. The great color, great shape and style. They're Picasso-esque, I would say, but in Tony's own style. He was a protector of women. He was a lover of women. He was respectful, particularly mothers and children and the relationship there. He did several sculptures that way, but these particular paintings are very powerful in that way, I think. So I like those.
I think his visions came together when he met Catherine Quinn and had these two beautiful children. I've never seen him happier in his life
Yeah,
than he was now.
I think so. And I think, like we talked earlier, that the way she responded to him was what he always needed. That was something special about the way she responded to him.
Well, and at the time of life.
Yeah, time of life. And the way he enjoyed those children was special. He had more free time. He was more homebody.
Yeah, he was.
And Catherine was just the special person that he needed at that time. And the way she took care of him, the way she took care of the children for the next 20 years on top of it, just was something very special about her. You can see that quality in her was exactly what he needed. There was not a selfish bone in her body. She took care of him, doted on the children, and that was just exactly what he needed
Can
at
you
that time.
imagine how lucky that man was?
Yeah, it's true. It's very
to
true.
have her. I mean,
Very true.
it was a beautiful relationship.